wisdom and power, our God, our God.
This past Monday, my cousin, who's just a few years younger than me and who has 3 sons like we do, who are just a little bit younger than our boys, staggered down, lost his almost 10-year battle with ALS, with Lou Gehrig's disease. And he was a great guy. As far as I know, he was a great husband. He was an incredible father. He made a difference in the world. And, he was being prayed for by a lot of people all over the place, people of lots of different faiths. He impacted countless of young people in coaching and in being involved in youth sports. He was an encourager to young people. He was a role model for many people in the midst of this suffering that he went through. And if I'm honest, I have to say I don't get it. I really don't. There are people who have lots of answers for why we have this sort of suffering and why evil exists and why we have these diseases. It was God's will, and he had something better in mind for Taz. Or if he or those praying for him had more faith or prayed in a different format and believed more, then he would have been healed. Or it's all preordained and in God's sovereign plan. You just have to trust that. Or, God's working something better that we can't see. Or God needed Taz or wanted Taz to be with him. And look, I get some of those things are true. We work through those issues. The reality is God is sovereign, and we can't see everything that he sees. And his timing isn't our timing. But as I walk through life and as I walk through the challenges of my life and all that we're going through, even in our country, not just in our country, in the world. And as I read Psalm 103 in the midst of that, I have to say, I have some questions. I have some things that I think, okay, I'm not sure that I completely get that, and you might too. So let's take some minutes and try to unpack that together today. Let's take a look at Psalm 103 together. Let me read it for us. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget none of his benefits. Who forgives all of your iniquity, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and mercy, who satisfies you with good, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. The Lord works righteousness and justice for all who are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. He will not always chide, nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with me according to my sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. For the wind passes over it, and it's gone, and its place knows it no more. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to those who keep his covenant and remember to do his commandments. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. Bless the Lord, O you his angels, you mighty ones who do his word, obeying the voice of his word. Bless the Lord, all his hosts, his ministers who do his will. Bless the Lord, all his works in all places of his dominion. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Let's see if we can unpack some of this psalm and what's so good about it in the midst of the moment that we're living through. And the first thing that we have to recognize is that David tells us to worship with everything that we are, all that is within us. He begins the psalm, bless the Lord, O my soul. The word bless means to delight God's heart by expressing love and gratitude for all he is and all he does. 6 out of 22 of the verses in this psalm use the word bless. David tells us to do it 7 times. Bless the Lord, O my soul, in verse 1. Bless his holy name, verse 1. Bless the Lord, O my soul, verse 2. Bless the Lord, O you his angels, verse 20. Bless the Lord, all his hosts, verse 21. Bless the Lord, all his works, verse 22. Bless the Lord, O my soul, verse 22. 30% of the verses in this psalm say, bless the Lord. It shouldn't be lost on us that David bookends this psalm with those words, bless the Lord, O my soul. It's a reminder to worship, to bless the Lord. The beginning and the end of all that we are and all that we have to do is to bless God, to delight his heart. And he goes on even further to say that we are to bless him with all that we actually are, all that is within us. Our soul is all that is within me. It's all I am and all I have. It's my whole being and my whole experience. Dallas Willard diagrams the soul in this way. The center of who we are is the spirit. It's the heart or the will. Then it goes out to mind. That's thought or feeling. It moves out to the body, the very way that we walk through this world with our bodies. It moves out to the social, all the interactions that we have in the world. All of that is what encompasses the soul. It encompasses everything that we are. You begin at the very inmost part of your being with your heart and will going out to the mind, thought, and feeling. Then your body, then your social interactions. This is your soul, all of it. Everything about you. This is what David's saying. Bless the Lord with everything about you. All that you are, all that you have, all that you do. We live in a worship music culture, and that's shaped us a bit. When we say that was a great time of worship, we almost always mean that we were at a service where the singing was amazing, the band was good, we were moved in some ways, and I got to tell you, I love that. That resonates with me. I've been playing music since I was a very small child. Our family has been surrounded by music, and we've surrounded our boys with music, so I love music. That all resonates with me. But I'm not sure that we've ever heard someone say that was a great time of worship after serving at a homeless shelter, or after taking a meal to someone who's going through a really hard time, or someone who just had a baby, or maybe someone who's ill. We wouldn't walk away from that experience and say that was a great time of worship. But Paul teaches us that that's what worship is. It encompasses everything that we are and everything that we can give. In Romans chapter 12, Paul writes this, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. He isn't saying that singing and music isn't worship. He's just saying it's way, way, way more than that. Eugene Peterson paraphrases it this way, and I love this paraphrase. He says, so here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. David reminds himself and us that we are to worship God with all that we have. He's giving himself a reminder. Don't forget, note to self, don't forget to worship. All that we are, and in all the realms of our life, we are to give God who we are and to pay attention to him. That's what worship is. The law tells us the same thing in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Jesus reminds us of it in the greatest commandment. He's saying the same thing in Matthew 22:37. When he's asked, teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. You should give him everything. We are to worship God with all that we are because of who he is. But David also tells us to worship God because of what he does. He tells us to worship God because of what he does. He says, bless the Lord in verse 2, O my soul, and forget none of his benefits. Don't forget any of the things that he does, because God is worthy of worship for who he is, but he's also worthy of worship for what he does. Sometimes we have to wonder exactly what the psalmists mean when they say things like that. Praise God for what he's done, or, oh, praise the Lord for he's done great things for you, or praise the Lord, all you people. But we don't always get an exact list of what he means or what he's talking about or what is meant there. But we have to fill in the blanks. What has God done? What has he done in my life? What great things has God been doing? But here, David's quite clear about the benefits he's speaking about. And it's not just a few things. Notice the list. Here's what God does according to this psalm. Go back and look at Psalm 103 as I give you the list. He forgives all your iniquity. He heals all your diseases. He redeems your life from the pit. He crowns you with steadfast love and mercy. He satisfies you with good things. He renews your strength like the eagle. He works righteousness and justice for all the oppressed. He's merciful and gracious. He's slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. He won't always chide us. A paraphrase there is, he won't always nag us or scold us. And he doesn't hold on to his anger forever. A paraphrase here is that he doesn't carry a grudge. He doesn't give us what we deserve in terms of judgment. He doesn't repay us according to our sin. His love is higher than the heaven. He forgives sin infinitely as far as the east is from the west. He shows compassion for his children and to those who fear him. He remembers our frailty, that we are dust. You know, verse 13 of this psalm really resonates with me because as weak and as frail as I am, I can relate to it. He says, as the Father shows compassion for his children, so the Lord shows compassion for those who fear him. Eugene Peterson paraphrases this kind of simply. As parents feel about their children, God feels for those who fear him. You know, God loves us desperately and deeply, just as we love our children, and he longs to give us good things, just as we long to give good things to our children. He longs to heal us and to revive us and to relieve us. He longs to rescue us and to redeem us. Just like we want to do those things for our kids, we want every good things for our kids that they can grab hold of, don't we? And so David says we worship God with all we are, but we worship him for all that he's done, and he's done so many good things. And we do sometimes miss the good things that he's doing. Love God, bless God with all that's within you, bless God, and don't forget any of the things he does. And I love it so far, and it all works for me so far, except for when I think, yeah, but what about when he doesn't? What about when he doesn't? Because God tells us to worship him by taking the long view. God is a God of eternity. And he doesn't always do what we want him to do right when we want him to do it. I love all that David says, but if I'm honest, one of the first questions that came to my mind when I was reading about all his benefits is, but what if he doesn't? What if he doesn't do those things? Because in my personal experience, I don't always see God doing all those things. Even for the most faithful people I know in the kingdom, or for the most faithful followers that I can read about historically, and not even for David or those giants of the faith in Scripture, God doesn't always move in exactly the way that they want, exactly when he wants. What about when God doesn't give me what I want when I want it? Because again, if you and I are honest, we can say, he hasn't healed all my diseases, or at least he hasn't healed all the diseases of everyone that I know, even the really faithful people. God-fearing and loving people that I know don't always get pulled out of the pit. I don't even always get pulled out of the pit. And he didn't even do those things for David every time. We get some clues, though, in the psalm about where David's at with all this. David thinks of these things, and if we notice the language of the psalm, particularly as it turns toward the bottom, he recognizes that while God may not always meet me right now, right where I am, in just the way that he wants, that I want him to, that God is eternal and that he sees things from a bigger perspective. We're mortal and our lives are brief, but God is immortal and he's from everlasting to everlasting. God's activity isn't marked from within my frail and brief life. It's marked from his perspective. How is man characterized in this psalm? Man is characterized as brief and frail and from dust. Verse 14, for he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. Verse 15, man's days are like grass. He's like a flower of the field. It's gone and you may not even be able to tell that it was ever there. How's God characterized in this psalm? He's characterized as immortal and eternal. Verse 11, as high as the heavens are above the earth, that's how great his love is. It's infinitely high. Verse 12, as far as the east is from the west, that's how far he moves our iniquities from us. I love J. Vernon McGee, the old Bible commentator. I used to listen to him all the time when I was in college and I was driving a delivery route. J. Vernon McGee says this, you can't go north forever. You can only go north for a while. Then you got to go south because you're going to get to the top and you got to come down. But he says you can go east or you can go west forever. You can just keep going. You can just keep going. There's no end to it. It's infinite loop. Verse 17, the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting. Whatever our love is, whatever our lives are, God's love and his life is everlasting. It's infinitely present. And so David is saying, God is worthy of all of us in worship, our whole selves for who he is, and he's worthy of our worship because of what he does. But even when we can't see what he does within a short period of time, within our time frame, he's still worthy of being worshiped. Think about all of the waiting and all of the disappointment that David himself faced in his life. Remember, it's 14 years between the time that he's anointed king and when he's actually crowned king. And much of that time, David spent in the desert. Eventually, he is crowned king. And so he does see God's faithfulness in that way. David's child by Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapter 12 dies. It says, and the Lord afflicted the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and he became sick. And David sought God on behalf of the child, and he fasted and laid all night on the ground. And the elders came to lift him up, but he wouldn't have any of it. And he didn't eat, and he fasted, and this went on for 7 days. And then the child died. David didn't get what he wanted. Think about the other people that God doesn't meet right off the bat. Daniel is carted off to Babylon as a 17 to 20-year-old, and as far as we know, he never comes back. He longs for God, and he serves God, and he worships God, even in that pagan place, but he never comes back. He served under 7 Babylonian kings and under 2 Persian kings. And when the exiles went back to Jerusalem, Daniel doesn't go with them, because we find him still in Babylon after they go back. Joseph gets pulled out of the pit, but it's nothing like quick. Joseph is thrown into the pit by his brothers, and then he's sold into slavery, and then he goes and he serves in Potiphar's house, and then he becomes a prisoner. And then finally he gets out and he serves the Pharaoh. But we're talking about years of time. It's 13 years between when Joseph is thrown into the pit and when he begins to serve in Pharaoh's court. Some Jewish commentators think that Joseph was in prison 12 of those 13 years. And so David knows, even as he writes this psalm of worship, that not every sickness gets healed, not every captive gets free, not every oppressed person receives justice. And we know that too. Not everyone gets pulled out of the pit, even of God's most faithful followers. You know, this psalm is believed to have been written towards the end of David's life. He's seen a lot. He's experienced a lot. And it seems to me that here's what he knows. He's been forgiven. He's been healed. He's been redeemed. And he's been crowned. And he's been satisfied. And he's been renewed. He's experienced God's love and compassion and blessing and infusion of strength that only God can give. But it always It doesn't always come in his timing and not always in just the way that he wants, because he's faced hardships and he knows that God has walked with him in the midst of those hardships, even more than he's always gotten him quickly out of those hardships. You know, God works in his timing, not our timing. He's eternal. We're finite. And so David says, note to self, don't forget to worship. Don't forget to worship no matter what's going on. He says we need to worship God with all that we are, our whole beings, all of the facets of our life. He says we need to worship in every circumstance. When we're in the pit and when we're out, when we're waiting, we need to worship. We need to worship God for all that he's done. And we need to worship God even if he hasn't done what we want him to do for us right when we want it. You know, God's delays are not always God's denials, but we're waiting for God's timing. You know, God is able to get us out of anything and to heal us from everything, but he's not obligated to do so. I started asking myself this question: how much of our worship and how much worship throughout history springs out of God's non-activity? How often do we begin to worship when God doesn't act? When he doesn't move just when we thought he should? How much worship comes as a result of God not acting for us in the way we want him to, in the moment we want him to, and whatever moment we're in right now? Because here finally is the proclamation of David in this psalm. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens and his kingdom rules over all. When you get right down to the bottom of it, when you get right down to where it all comes together, the Lord has established his throne in the heavens and his kingdom rules over all. And that's the overarching important thing to see in this psalm. God is worthy of worship and blessing because while in the timeline of our lives, we may not experience everything we want right when we want it, God has established his kingdom and it rules over all, and it's all about him in the end. So, note to self, don't forget to worship. Think about the people that the writer of Hebrews describes in Hebrew 11, and most of them lived all of their lives without ever seeing the fulfillment of the kingdom, without ever seeing what they really hoped they would see. And so he says, therefore, bless the Lord, you angels, you mighty ones who do his word. Bless the Lord, all his hosts, you who do his will. Bless the Lord, all his works in all the places of his dominion. And bless the Lord, O my soul. Don't forget to bless. And so how are you doing at blessing God in the midst of your life right now? Are you finding God in the midst of this moment we're living through? You know, we find ourselves closing in on the end of 2020, and the world is still dealing with this pandemic, and we have lots of conflict, and we have lots of things going on all around us. We have ups and downs and strife and challenges in life, and you know, we thought this was all going to be over. We thought it was going to get over quickly, that we would get through this pandemic and we'd all get back to work and everything would get back to normal. And then as the election came closer, some people were saying, well, as soon as the election's over, this will all be done. Now we're being told there's going to be a vaccine in the middle of December. Or some are saying, you know, by next summer, everything's going to get back to normal. Let me just tell you what I think. I have no idea. I don't know when this is all going to get sorted out, and I don't know how it's all going to get sorted out. That's just above my pay grade. But in a minute, this challenge is going to be behind us. This pandemic is going to be behind us. We're going to look back in a minute. We're going to remember that this happened. But then there's going to be something else we're going to be walking through, some other challenge we're going to be facing. And we need to face those challenges in worship, in trusting God with our whole selves. You know, Dallas Willard says this: God has yet to bless anyone except for where they actually are. God has yet to bless anyone except for where they actually are. Your call, my call, is to be faithful in this moment right now. And he will bless me in this moment right now. And I will bless him in this moment right now if I can keep my head about me. David's call on us is to delight God's heart by living my whole life as a matter of worship for who he is. And with a long view that ultimately He's got this, and my moment-to-moment existence can't be a barometer of His faithfulness. I don't know why God didn't heal my cousin. I'm not exactly angry with God about it, but I don't fully understand it. I'm going to miss him terribly, but I will tell you that he lived with ALS for nearly 10 years, and for the last 3 years, every breath was a struggle. Every breath was literally a battle. His son Jonah wrote on his Facebook page, "My hero can finally rest." Because the very act of living for my cousin Taz, certainly in the last 3 or so years, was an incredible challenge. But here's what I know. He lived long enough to see all of his boys through high school, and he attended every football, baseball, and lacrosse game that they played in. He instigated at least one, if not two, gatherings of the Roberts boys to get together every year and hang out and just remember that we belong to each other. Based on what I know, he encouraged and loved people right up to the end of his life and has influenced tons of people, not just in this life and not just in his life, but also in his death. Oh, that God would find us faithful like that as we walk through the days that we have and we give him ourselves fully. We don't always get what we want. Things don't always work out the way we want. But we have pretty short patience spans, pretty short attention spans. We want things to work, and we want to get out of them. But God is worthy of our whole lives and all of our worship, whatever our circumstances. And so I want to challenge you in a couple of things. Think about this small project to refocus your attention on God in this moment that you're in. Not the one that's coming, but this moment that you're in. To remember that you're blessed and you're called to bless God by your whole life. I want to invite you to write 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph is this: I worship God because of. What are the things that you see God at work in your life doing? What are the benefits that you see from God right now? And then I worship you in the midst of. How are you worshiping God right now in the midst of what you're going through? And then I worship God, I worship you in spite of the things that I'm facing. I'm going to worship you from the pit. I'm going to worship you from this moment. I'm not going to wait till I get out of it. I'm going to worship you in it. And then let me invite you to think about worship. As we move into this Advent season, how will you worship God with your intellect, with your mind? How will you worship God with your intellect? How will you worship God with your voice? And then how will you worship God with your body? And then how will you worship in service to others? Worship is way bigger and way more than just 1 or 2 things. It's giving all of ourselves to him. My prayer is that as we walk this journey out, the life that we have, this moment that we have, that our lives would be faithful in blessing the one who made us and who gives us every good thing. Pray that God will bless you as you go into this week. Take care.